Oh, right, it's working. There's a miracle. So, the topic is I couldn't make up my mind for a title between the dark side of paganism and working with the shadow, which sounds a little bit more upmarket and like some kind of self-help therapy course.
Psychoanalysis.
Exactly. So it's sort of somewhere between the two.
Dr. Freud.
Well, Dr. Jung in this
Dr.
case.
Jung, yes.
Herr Dr. Jung.
I like Jungian theory. I'm really interested in it.
It does seem to be having a bit of an upswing. I was going to say locally, I'm thinking Harwich is Harwich, which is not local to Ipswich per se, but within the kind of spitting distance community, there are more people expressing an interest in Jungian things of the last few months, which is.
May I expound a little?
Shall I look the other way?
No. Some years ago now, I had about 18 months of waking dreams. When I closed my eyes, there was another scene playing out. And a lot of this was, I could correlate to Jungian theory of the thinness between the different layers of consciousness. I'm being informed by a much deeper consciousness to the front of my brain, which is usually doing walking and eating and getting me from A to B, but it was informing me of much deeper things. And I spent about a year writing them down. And I've actually started again. It happened a little bit last night. I had a significant dream, and a lot of these were, I could correlate them with Jungian theory. Jung's theory of quaternity.
Mm-hmm.
That in your dream, they're all you. The four characters are all you.
Yeah.
One is you, and at least one is the opposite gender. But they all different aspects of yourself. If not, they could be. If they become specific, then you can identify them as archetypes.
Yes. Did you get the sense as to what it all means, or is that yet to be revealed?
Well, I could relate it to something that went on earlier. One of my first little dreams, visions, whatever you call them, was a small child. It was a young woman holding a flower with 4 petals. And we walked to this cliff. And as we walked to this cliff, she wore something yellow, and she got smaller and smaller until she was this toddler that was stuck on the cliff.
The eternal child.
And then we looked. It was a sort of stormy weather, and a boat. She said, "That is your boat." As I flew from the cliff to the boat. Steering the boat was a small male child and a small female child. And when I arrived at the boat, one went over the side, I can't remember which one, and one went down below. And I interpreted that as I was letting my children control my life, my inner children, my inner archetype of male and female. And down below were all the archetypes, the motley crew, if you like. And I eventually got through this type dream type meditation. I've got the warrior up and put him in charge of the ship, because I can't be in that state of consciousness. So the children had gone over the side, vainly attempting to steer my ship of my life through the storm. And I put the warrior in charge of the boat. And then I came back to another sense of consciousness. And this continued for months and months on end in similar vein.
Interesting imagery. Very appropriate. Collective unconscious, the ocean.
It is, yeah, it is. He talks a lot about the collective unconscious too. That it's like, and his theory is of course the unification of the archetypes. That we're all working to gather the disparate parts of our psyche and get them to work together, and then there will be some sort of unity. And we'll be a much more complete and whole and more spiritual human being.
Yes.
With
That's it in a nutshell. Yes, absolutely. And even better that you can only do it when you're the other side of 40. So we're all in the right vein.
Yeah.
One of the few benefits of being the other side of 40 is that you attain.
Yeah.
Or well, you don't definitely attain, but you have the opportunity to attain.
You have the opportunity to attain wisdom.
Yes.
Or not. Well, I think you have to attain an awful lot of self-awareness before you can proceed.
Yes, you need the life experience. But speaking of archetypes, the focus of the talk is the shadow. So just as I'm sure you're already aware, but in case anyone ends up listening to the recording who's not aware, Jung's argument is that in every individual life, but also collectively, societies, religious movements, workplaces, any kind of community of people has both a collective shadow and also the individual shadow of each person within it. And it's impossible to go through life without casting a shadow. So everyone, no matter how saintly, has a shadow.
The stronger the sun, the
darker the shadow.
Darker the shadow.
Absolutely. And it does also mean the flip side, that even the vilest person has a source of light within him. So it goes in both directions. Which can be difficult to remember when you're faced with some people unrelentingly vile, but there is some kind of light within them, but that's the basis of that theory. Where Jung and Freud, or one of the places where Jung and Freud parted company, and there are quite a few places where they parted company, waving their handbags at each other and hissing and spitting, but one of them was in the understanding of what constitutes the shadow. So for Freud, the shadow is basically the id, the dark side, the primal unregenerated part of us.
Consciousness.
Screaming, shouting, hissing, spitting, peeing on the floor, chewing the carpet, being generally antisocial.
It's unmodulated, isn't it?
It is. Uncivilized, unregenerate. The inner barbarian, if you like.
There is no sort of thought involved, it's just an instant reaction.
Yes. Pure emotion.
Pure, usually survival.
Absolutely. Whereas Jung said there is that. So he wasn't completely disagreeing with Freud. He was just saying there's another bit on top of it. And Freud didn't like the idea that there would be another bit on top of it. So that's where they fell out. So Jung said the other bit on top of it is not just that kind of primal raging beast within, that screaming infant that wants everything and wants it now and doesn't give a flying donut about anyone else who might be inconvenienced. But it's also anything that you have been told in your childhood, your upbringing, your socialisation, any part of you that you have been told to hide, which could include things that are actually quite good, quite positive. It doesn't have to be.
It's not
horrific.
No, it doesn't mean it's dark and evil. It is just something which is unrecognised.
Absolutely.
You have no knowledge of it. It is.
Or you've lost the knowledge of it.
It's gone completely over you. You're unaware of it.
Yes.
We come back to why this. We must have self-awareness.
Yes.
We lessen the shadow.
No Theiseuton. new way so. So for Jung, there is the potential that the shadow brings good things. Doesn't mean that's the case of absolutely every single person on the planet. Depends on the childhood the person's had. But if you have someone who's been born to a very football crazy family, they're very sporty, they're very kind of all of that, and that child is very arty-farty, then the parents might think, what's art, that's a load of old cobblers, we don't want that. Let's beat it out of them and just get them to focus on sports. So the art will become, or the creativity or whatever it is.
Create his shadow for him.
Absolutely. And therefore, in redeeming the shadow, if the child ever does, of course, what they might discover is their latent artistic ability. Not just rage and hate and all the usual dark things, but positive things too.
But something, it's just that you bring to light something which has been buried, it's hidden. And it could be beneficial, it's just dark because it's hidden.
Absolutely. And even arguably from a Jungian point of view, that even the dark stuff is potentially useful because it's survival instinct. So the mother cat who rips apart anyone who threatens her kittens, that level of violence is quite dark. But in the right circumstances, it is to the benefit of her kittens and herself if she's defending herself from attack.
Yes.
So a creature that didn't have the capacity to, go all claws and teeth and would.
You don't learn anything unless it comes from something which is conflicted. You learn nothing.
No. Oh, indeed.
There must be the struggle and the decision that comes from that struggle.
Yes. And it's got to be a choice. Jung says
Well,
that
when
you've
you
got to face your own darkness.
yeah, well, it's like when you become that self-aware, it is a choice. But if you're not self-aware, it isn't. You just
Blunder on.
You blunder on, conforming to parental scripts.
Yes.
Or you're so unaware you don't make your own. You don't form your own life plan, your own script.
One thing that Jung and Freud did strongly agree on is the idea of defense mechanisms and projection, particularly. That if you cannot acknowledge your own darkness, you will see it in other people, and it will trigger a reaction when you see it or you imagine it.
It's like when you unreasonably dislike behaviours or people. That's a reflection of your own shadow, isn't it?
Yes. The key factor is the unreasonableness. Disliking somebody burgles your house and you dislike them for it doesn't mean you're a secret burglar.
No.
Because that's a rational dislike.
It's irrational dislike. It's the irrational.
Yes. The
or
intensity
unreasonable prejudices and dislikes.
Absolutely. And the fixation, like old Mary Whitehouse.
Fixation.
With wanting to constantly watch sex and violence on TV and disprove it. So shocking I had to watch it 4 times.
I've only spent 8 hours watching it to disapprove of it. And if you just normally disapproved of it, you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't
even watch it in the first place.
You wouldn't do it. It's like you watching porn. If you like it, watch it. If you don't.
Yes, but it would be odd to watch it purely to be disgusted by it.
But a whole campaign trying to influence other people to your will, that's rather...
Yes.
Or the customs, the border sort of border agents in, I believe, Saudi Arabia who insisted that a woman remove even her watch strap to check that no skin was showing. Not just her watch strap, obviously, but
everything else as well. Yeah, good lord. That is brilliant. In terms of people encountering their own shadows, that intensity of reaction can be a guideline for therapy or self-counselling, self-study, self-awareness, to think, what do I overreact to? And draw up a list of the kinds of things you overreact to. and then start to think about why you overreact to them. What is it about this particular thing or that particular person that annoys me to the point where I'm planning to bury them in concrete and dispose of them in some way? So it's the intensity of your own reaction can become a guideline, a flag to say this is clearly something I need to think about more in myself, and try and get to the bottom of why do I have quite such an intense dislike
reaction.
Yeah.
But it could be, but it might not be that reaction. It could also be a lack of reaction,
An apathy.
an apathy, which is also a disguising.
Potentially.
It's like you're so shut down.
Yeah.
You create an apathy over it. So
Borderline catatonia.
push, just push. Nothing to see here. Move on.
Yeah.
But it's there, quietly festering. You know what I mean?
Well, yes.
It's like you don't want to be seen as a violent reactor. I could be talking about me here too, of course. It's like, in a sense, it would be unreasonable to act in the way that my shadow wants to react. And so you have such control, you create an apathy about it.
Yeah.
Pretend and
To the opposite extreme.
shove it in the bottom drawer somewhere. Nothing to see here. Let's
Yes.
move on. But it's still a reaction, and it's still part of the shadow. It's just how you deal with it.
Absolutely.
I mean, some people will react to some event with violence, and you can see people kicking and freaking in the streets.
Especially these days.
And it's always gone on. And other people will overreact in a different way. They will never go out at night again, you know what I mean?
Yes.
They will overreact with paranoia. I will never walk down that street again, I'll never go to that pub again, I will never visit that town again because of...
But what happened? Yes.
But that is... It's the other side of the coin.
Refusing to deal with the
It's a
experience.
refusal to deal with it. It's
Yes.
just a different way of dealing with it.
Yes. And it can be somebody's been, let's say, mugged, and they don't want to go to that street where they were mugged or that town where they were mugged. It could be, from a Jungian point of view, that the rage they have experienced, that they want to mangle their mugger. What they're frightened of is not so much meeting the mugger again, but that
Fighting
rage
of
within
their own feelings
themselves
about it.
being sparked off. Yeah. And it's that inner rage they haven't quite come to terms with.
Talking now, I just want to say something which happened quite some time ago. And what happened was, I was at the beach, and you know the steps down to the beach is covered with seaweed sometimes. Well, I slipped. Banged quite badly. And when I recovered, I walked up the steps again, and at the spot where it had happened, it sort of happened again. There was the trauma of it was still in that place, and I think that happens too. Where a trauma has happened, the energy of that trauma still remains sometimes.
Yep. And
It's like murders and hangings and suicides. I mean, it's like the energy of it isn't dispersed or doesn't cling to the person that's carrying it. It's just ejected and held. I mean, as lots of psychics say, it's still there. Whatever happened there is still there.
Yes. Which is an interest, I think, where a pagan approach to this perhaps differs from, say, an atheist or a Christian or whatever other type of. There's lots of. I'm sure there's Jungians of every conceivable view and persuasion going, is that we allow for spirit of place, for that kind of animistic element, which maybe a more traditional Jungian would be thinking in terms of internalised psychic issues, rather than psychic issues attached
Like a
to
traumatised
a physical place. Yes.
I started the gallows, for example.
Yeah.
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 The constant trauma and that energy is still in that place. Well, you've had experiences
Oh,
of
yes.
stuff like that.
Yes, I have. Yeah. Sort of getting trapped spirits released.
It opens up a new angle, I think, that whole kind of idea of the place, or of whether it's energies or actual spirits, or depending on the situation, that there is something beyond the individual. So rather than the focus being on this person on the couch.
We go back to the collective energies of the planet and of everything that lives on it.
Yes.
And the collective unconscious of everything, every being that is on the planet.
Absolutely.
It's all connected.
Definitely.
My hands tingle when I say stuff like that. They do.
Two angles we can think of. One is the idea of pagans as the shadow, the collective. And the other is the idea that pagans have a shadow as a collective. So in the first sense, the most obvious example that leaps to mind, and going back to that quaternity theory, there's Tony Wolff came up with the idea years ago that just as Jung had described the male psyche as having 4 parts, she said, well, the female psyche also has 4 parts. One of the parts in the man is usually referred to as the sage or the wizard or the wise old man, or some variant term. She said the equivalent is the idea of the wise woman, or the prophetess, the sort of the mystical woman, which is both a positive and a negative. And the positive is the wise woman, the sort of lovely old granny in the fairy stories who gives advice and all of that. But the dark side is the witch. And the idea of the more the kind of storybook Wizard of Oz type, green skin, cackling, warty witch.
Yeah, well, it's like the conflicts that we create for ourselves in the physical realm, they go on in the psychic realm as well. These competitive, there are the archetypes are sort of conflicted amongst themselves and not recognised by each other, and they're working it out in the deep unconscious. In my sort of understanding of Freud, they're working this out as they work them out in the upper realms, they try and inform us of the sort of what's going on in progress, which can be termed mental afflictions, psychic afflictions, dark nights of the soul, and sometimes they resolve themselves and you become a much more balanced human being once they're sorted out, because you can't do anything. You have to think it before you can do it.
Yes.
And you have to imagine it before you can think it. Nothing can be done unless you imagine it, and then you think it and rationalise it, and then you act it. Is that not so? As magicians,
Absolutely.
you would say, as a magician.
Begins in there. Absolutely.
Am I making sense? Sort of sense,
Yes,
or am
yes.
I just talking to people? Yeah, because once I get into this stuff, I just start talking off the top of my head.
Oh no, not at
But-
all. But thinking of that collective idea, I mean, we could make the very obvious connection to the witch trials and the Inquisition and the paranoia over previous centuries about witches and wizards.
Yeah.
And
Most society has created its own shadow. It's not us, it's them.
Indeed. But we become
Whether
scapegoats for
it's
it.
bias, racism, persecution, we've decided that all the wrongdoing and all the evil. It's them, it's not us, it's them.
Yes.
Safer. It's safer
Well,
to expel it from ourselves into the goats that.
Well, yeah, it's the
Quite-
scapegoating, it's the goats.
Yes,
It's the
absolutely.
evil goats, it's not us, we're good. The evil goats did it.
The scapegoats.
Yeah.
If we kill the goats, it's all gone.
Which
And get a nice
obviously,
feast afterwards.
well, yes.
They
if
don't
were
realise
cannibals-
they're taking me back in if they eat the goat. Oh, I we digress now.
Yes.
Even if we go back to earlier periods, you look to ancient Rome and the law codes of Rome, there were codes against people practicing maleficent, destructive magic, curses and spreading diseases and so on through magic.
Yeah.
So even though it's not quite the same understanding that the Christian inquisitors had about witches, it's still that idea that some people can use powers to do horrible, horrible things, and they've got to be restricted and regulated. So even when society was pagan, there was still an anxiety about.
Yeah, I don't think this goes so deep. It is common to all ages and all humanity.
Absolutely. Which helps to understand how other people have seen pagans and why they go around at various points in history hanging them and setting light to them.
A convenient scapegoat for a time and a place.
Yes,
It could be the gypsies, the Jews, the Poles, whoever.
absolutely.
You're not going to find evil in yourself. You're always going to find it in somebody
Somebody
else.
Indeed. But the particular angle is this notion that there is the possession of power and ability, that whether it's in league with the devil or whether it's in league with some other force entirely. So that the dark side of other archetypes doesn't necessarily involve those types of problems. It's the dark side of that wise man, wise woman archetype. And perceiving it in other people. That they have the powers, they are getting up to no good, they're casting curses and blighting the crops and doing this and doing that. And it's the fear of intangible power. They're making bad stuff happen.
And it's also the fear that you yourself have this power.
Or could be lured into wanting it.
Yeah, lured by someone else into doing it.
Yes.
It's the fear of not really knowing who you are and what you're capable of.
Yes. And still very much alive if we think about the problems they have in a lot of different places in Africa, even today.
Yeah.
Where they have witch prisons and not just in Africa, but there's been murders and things in this country.
They're still killing children
Yeah.
and all sorts of things and so on. Yeah.
So it's the same, although they're not phrasing it as pagans in the way that we understand pagans in the West. Same kind of
It is
anxieties.
no different.
So there's that notion of whether we're thinking about interfaith work, kind of trying to get people to like pagans. One of the barriers you're overcoming is that many people have, as part of their culture, part of their history, part of their background, this notion that them lot, whether we call them witches or heathens or whatever word we want to use to describe them lot, they have powers, they are in league with forces. We have to keep them at arm's length and not trust them because they're dishonest and they'll say one thing and they'll do the dead opposite. And all of those long-standing anxieties, from a Jungian point of view, they're cultural shadows,
Yes.
which are attached to
Yes.
pagans.
It's just also a fear of powerlessness on their part. Or
Yes.
perhaps God is not as powerful as we think God is. Perhaps
Well, if you're thinking of a God you believe in is omnipotent, and then these people who have powers, they can't be anything to do with the God we believe in.
Indeed. Which creates some interesting
Creates some
theological conundrums.
interesting thing. Okay, then your God is not all knowing and all powerful. Then
or at least not willing to stop the
Well,
forces
this
of
was the original concept of the Garden of Eden thing. There was God, and then there was not God. That was the original shadow of not, wasn't it?
Yes. Crowley, as we call them these days.
Uncle Alistair, Uncle Alistair, how dare
Not
you?
that one. I think Good Omens.
Uncle Alistair. Good Omens was hilarious.
It was very good. The other side of this is I think of within the pagan community, so not so much archetypal forces projected on us by wider society, but within a community, how prevalent paganism is and has been for decades and decades to infighting and witch wars and backstabbing and bitching and shitty behaviour between pagans. And the kind of recurrence that group over there, they're up to no good.
Villains.
Yeah. and so we have the kind of internal shadow, as well as the one projected onto us by
Well,
wider society.
when this factionalism goes on and has gone on since the beginning of time, I mean, you have one tribe in the forest, the one tribe doesn't live in the forest, so they're the other.
Yeah.
From the very beginning,
Absolutely.
they are not us, so they must be
Up to no good.
up to no good. They're not one of us, they must be one of the
One of them.
something else. Let's nip over there and burn their village down and slaughter them because it doesn't matter because they're not one of us.
Yep. They're not the same.
And human behaviour has not changed one jot since.
No. We are slow to evolve when it comes to things like that. Whether the kinds of, that could be an area for research and studying itself, whether the kinds of feudings you see within paganism and the projecting of shadows from one group of pagans to another group of pagans, whether that is substantially different from the kind of projecting that we're seeing from wider society onto us. Or do we have kind of our own unique shadow? Something that would make no sense to anyone outside of paganism, but which we see in other pagans whom we dislike, and have that factionalism and tribalism against.
Factionalism goes on in all major religions.
Oh yeah, schisms left, right and centre. Yeah. They don't believe properly. They don't worship properly.
Don't believe in
We're not a real pagan if you mix pantheons or
Burn the wrong incense.
incense
don't
or
believe in the right Jesus, you know.
Start your circle in the wrong quarter.
yes.
Outrageous. And it's, I mean, the factionalism that's gone on in all major faiths, because I think there are those that seek conformity, which is impossible. And I think there are those that seek unity, which is also impossible. You just have to let people do what they want to do, and if they act reasonably, then that's okay.
We could argue that perhaps whilst externally it's this projection of the witch, the dark wizard type anxieties about people getting up to no good, there is another part of that quaternity of archetypal forces, of the father or mother role, which sometimes referred to as the king or the queen, which is the positive side, sort of leadership and confidence and strength and organisation and
Well,
taking
they are
responsibility.
these two powerful archetypes.
Yes.
Who you, as your gender suggests, you will identify with the king or the queen,
Yes.
or sometimes reverse,
Yeah.
depending
Can
on
be.
your thoughts about who you are internally,
Absolutely.
because they could be quite balanced internally or opposite.
Yes.
Internally.
Yes.
Externally, we are the gender we are. They are the
Sticky
major
ground
archetypes.
usually.
You mean, normally you aspire to be the king or the queen
In most cases, yes.
in most cases, or maybe a slightly lesser princes or princesses.
Yeah.
It's not quite the highest, but you aspire to be part of
Working
it,
on it.
the part of the royal court,
Yes. That's the princesses, the intermediate.
intermediate royals. And that's how you've sort of fit into this sort of psychic household, and warriors, magicians, or healers, or
Yes.
teachers. And how do you fit into this royal court?
The dark side argued for the king-queen archetype is the tyrant.
It's the dark side of the king.
Yes. Or equally
Or queen.
the queen, the tyrannical queen. Which can, in family dynamics, manifest as very domineering parents who suffocate and control and exploit and abuse their children. But if we think that within a pagan context, an awful lot of groups have a high priest, a high priestess, an archdruid, whatever the title may be for that particular style of paganism, there is a leader figure, a king or a queen, by some other term.
The pointy hat.
Whoever has the biggest wand,
Biggest, or the biggest pointy hat.
the deepest cauldron. Let's not.
Let's not go there, Robin.
I'm getting a bit Freudian
It is.
now.
We're slipping to the Freudian side now.
But thinking in terms of certainly the witch wars that I've either seen or ended up stuck in at some point over the decades, an awful lot of that is not so much, oh, they're going to cast spells on us. It's more power. That someone is misusing, abusing their power, they're lording it over others, they're scrabbling to shove our beloved leader out of the way and take their throne. It's all that kind of Game of Thrones power dynamic, whether it's really happening or it's just in the imaginations of the people involved, varies from situation to situation. But that...
Well, I think people are conflicted. If they're overcommitted to being parts of groups and feeling vulnerable and powerless, then you are going to get into that by trying to stop people doing all sorts of stuff.
Yes.
But I mean, I always have problems with groups because I don't actually fully agree with any of them. And I say, well, okay, I'll take what I need, and if I don't get what I need and it's a bit tedious, then I'll leave. And I'm not dependent. I'm always much more concerned if I only dependent rationale than the rationale of groups I align myself to.
But you could certainly argue that the opposite side of the king or queen is the devoted follower, the good son, the good daughter,
Yes.
who does as mummy or daddy tells him to do. And that, in a dark sense, or a destructive sense, anyway, a shadow sense, becomes the submissive, someone who is unquestioningly,
Unquestionably a disciple of something or other.
no matter how
I mean, this goes back to
bad it
this.
gets. Yes.
You subjugate, it's like the apathy you put. You subjugate
Yes.
the entire independent psychic thoughts and ideas and wishes.
We could, if we really want to upset people, think of whoever's listening to this. It's a common, I've heard this 1,000 times over in pagan groups over the years, this criticism that mainstream religion is full of people who meekly do as they're told. But how often do you find people joining pagan groups who have that same kind of tell me what to do on a great high guru of wisdom?
Hopefully a great guru, he's given me the answers to life and the universe, the wisest guru will say, "Fuck do I know?" Find it yourself. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Seek and you shall find.
The naughty ones say it will cost you 50 quid.
If you're stupid enough to pay, I will give you these secrets of the universe for 1,000 quid and a 2-year course.
Oh, and by the way, you've got a curse on you. It's going to cost you £3.
Yeah, you have a gas on you for 200
And a
years.
daughter
It'll
to,
cost you 500 quid for me to remove it.
Yeah.
And people do it.
They do indeed. Disturbingly lot of them.
Disturbingly often.
Yes. People, sometimes including people you think would be more sensible and know better. But
When I was doing my therapy training years ago, I used to go to all these exhibitions, you know, New Age exhibitions, and you used to get these groups who used to wear copper pyramids on their heads.
Oh yes, yes, I remember that.
And you know, as this copper pyramid does just bring forth enlightenment for you, or are you just waiting for a lightning strike?
just leaves a verdigris stain.
Yeah, they get green stains. It's like
It sharpens your faculties.
I harken back. I've done a couple of existentialism courses, and it's like sheeple. There's a herd mentality. We call them sheeple, people who don't have any sense of self-awareness and independent thought.
Yet.
And yet, we're all in process of attaining as much as we can during our time here.
Or perhaps they have a little sense of self-worth and
Well,
therefore they value what others say and
Yes.
do rather than what
Where they are unquestioning.
And I think that might be actively
I
encouraged.
think lots of people are unquestioning. They're not curious enough,
Yes.
and they'd much rather do as somebody else suggests that they might do than actually work it out for themselves.
It is a difficult thing to do.
It's difficult. It is a lonely furrow to plough.
Yes.
To be what they call you have to be genuine to
Authentic.
yourself,
Authentic.
authentic. In existentialism, you know, Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, to be authentic,
Yes.
not follow the herd behaviours in anything. I mean, I won't wear anything branded.
I can't afford anything branded.
No, well, that is a point. But I wouldn't, if I could, I wouldn't do it on principle, because you're bought and paid for
Yes.
by a commercial company.
You're paying to advertise their goods.
You're paying a lot of money to advertise their wares. You are, in some sense, a slave.
A walking billboard.
Well, yeah, you might as well have a billboard with pork pies on the front. Or what.
Just, have you seen any of those lately? It's all a thing of the past. The
I have seen
sandwich
billboard
board people.
lately.
Yeah.
And I mean, I won't align my. I'm a non-aligned person, if you sense. I
Very wise.
won't stick someone's badge on me and flag on my head and say I'm part of this. I could be part of this temporarily till I work out what you're on about, and I'll probably leave once I've
Twigged it.
twigged it.
We could, as an idea to finish on briefly, we'll keep this a short recording. Think about, from a Jungian point of view, the gods are archetypes.
Yes.
And to some pagans, indeed, the gods are archetypes and nothing more. But you also get polytheists, such as myself, who take the approach that you can be both an archetype and more than an archetype at one and the same time. In as much as we're all potentially archetypes in the eyes of somebody else.
Gods or demigods who
Yeah.
present themselves to us in our psyche as
In a way we understand.
archetypes. There's a
Yes.
way, in a sense, them upstairs can only talk to us in a way that we can understand.
We can accept without running
and
away
accept
and going.
without running away screaming. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So they gently present themselves to us in visions, dreams,
In the
varying levels of consciousness, and we can perceive those entities, if they are indeed entities. I don't think any of us are high enough level to discern
What is and what isn't.
whether they are internal creations of our consciousness or they are more than that and have an independent existence.
A few people have a
I think
intuitive
a few
vision of
people
them
may
being
have
more.
different views on that. I
Yes.
mean, I don't think
Yes.
I am at that level personally, but I accept that others would be able to discern whether something comes from what they would call spirit or
Yes.
extremely high levels, or there's something is a interpretation or creation of my own psyche,
Yes.
which that message is sort of interpreted and filtered down so that I have some understanding of it. That doesn't send me insane.
Too late.
But
And we're back to Cthulhu.
that is a,
Speaking of which,
you know, are we all complete fruit loops, as you say?
oh, I am. But
Or
we all have to have a hobby. There are deities that would fit within Jung's broad description.
yeah,
of what
I
constitute
think so.
shadows, dark forces.
Mm.
I'm going to skip the implications for Christianity and stick with the pagan pantheons. So you could
Too easy a target.
at one level, and there is an interesting kind of argument that could be had if we had a bit more time, or we could have it after the drinks break. In the way we in the 21st century perceive a deity isn't necessarily the way somebody 3,000 years ago
No.
perceived that deity.
Completely different.
So if we take, say, Hades in the Greek pantheon, to us now, death and the underworld seem terribly dark. But would someone in Athens 3,000 years ago have thought of Hades as this scary dark force? Or would they have just said, well, death is a part of
It's a
existence,
natural
it's
progression
what's
of how things are.
yeah, what's the big hoo-ha?
Well, there was the argument that death is capable of love, isn't there?
Yes, well, Corneille and
Persephone.
Persephone. Yes. So it's that kind of, are we talking shadow from a 21st century perception, or are we talking shadow from an ancient history perception, or both? Because there may be some beings who have they were shadows then and they're shadows now.
Yeah.
And there may be others who are one thing then and another thing now. Because it's us that's changed, not them.
Do deities develop as humans develop through incarnations?
I think it might be the safest option I'd go for would be to say our perceptions develop.
Yeah.
Whether the deity has changed is very hard to determine, but the way we see them.
There is only one
Perhaps.
deity who claims to be unchanging.
So it kind of opens up this
Deities may have to change as our perceptions change.
Yeah.
to make themselves
To make themselves
communicate and be known.
relevant and
Yes.
visible, however
Yes.
you perceive them.
Loki often gets a lot of stick these days, at least. And again, there is this debate as to whether people in the distant past, the ancient Scandinavians, would they have had quite as stigmatised a view of Loki
No,
as you tend to get these days?
No, I think he plays the role of the court jester in a slightly malevolent way, like the Lord of Misrule.
Yes.
It's like to prick the balloon of pomposity of the king.
Yes.
He's
And it's
needed
like
now.
you have to have that conflict to
Absolutely.
grow.
You need a
And
jester
change.
if you've got a king. and it's often one of the classic signs of tyranny is that they start shooting the comedians. Anyone who dares take the pee out of the president or the prime minister or the
Indeed.
king is
Closing
up against the wall.
Close the newspapers. Imprison journalists.
Yep.
First signs of tyranny.
Yes.
They can't abide ridicule
Yeah.
or the truth.
There's Ray Bradbury wrote a story set in it's a children's story, set in a travelling carnival that goes around these two boys.
I can't remember what it called.
All these.
I used to read lots of science fiction years
It's a
ago.
good story. The baddie of the piece is Mr. Dark, very young kid, who is the owner of the travelling circus, and he does weird, horrible things to people who get caught up in his circus. And they, towards the end of the story, just to ruin it for him, they realise the only way to break his power is to laugh at it.
Yeah.
Whilst they're scared of it, he can do as he damn well pleases.
Yeah.
It's only when they start ridiculing him and laughing at him and he
Yeah,
kind of
there-
shrinks in
There
their eyes.
there was a fantasy film some time ago, and the evil witch queen. She grew sort of uglier and thinner, and until the point is, they said the only way to break your power was for not to believe in you anymore. And they all turned her backs on the Queen and walked away.
And she shrivels.
Oh, that was her only power, to make them fear and make them do as she wished. So that is the greatest fear of evil and tyranny, that people will ignore them, laugh at them and walk away.
Yeah. And arguably bullies at a
And
much
yeah,
smaller level.
and the power just... It's a bit like when the Soviet Union failed. It's like the Poles refused to be afraid of them anymore. Didn't they? Weren't they? They just went on strike, the shipyard workers, till the regime fell, basically. They refused to be afraid anymore. And it's finished. Gone.
With Lech Walesa.
He became president in the end, didn't he?
Yeah.
But,
As a thought to close on, for my bladder explodes. You really wanted to know that.
too much information, Robin.
Share.
When we are whatever Wiccans, Druids, Heathens, Cometics, whatever we might be, if we're engaging with a deity, a god or goddess who is, or even a sort of a smaller order of spirits, less grand order of spirits that are seen as dark, dangerous, deadly, wild, to be kept at the end of a barge pole. How do we, and obviously the answer to this will probably vary according to which tradition you're in the first place, but I'm sure there are some people who just steer clear of such deities in the first place and have conniptions. I only want to talk to the nice cuddly ones. I don't want to talk to the scary ones, which I think is missing a huge chunk of the
Well, it's like-
experience.
Yeah.
You can't learn very much from the cuddly one.
Well, you can learn cuddly things, but there's more to life than cuddly things.
You need to learn a bit pretty things.
Yes,
Have you ever read Small Gods?
I have. One of the few Terry Pratchett ones I've actually read.
Hilarious.
Very good. Yeah.
Because the arch-villain is smitten by a tortoise, dropped by an eagle from about 3,000 feet, isn't he?
I think it's smited rather than smitten.
Oh, you're correcting my grammar now. Thank you very much. Smote.
I don't think he falls in love with him.
And he is smitten from a great height.
Whacked him over the head with him,
And
literally and figuratively.
literally, the god is a tortoise, you see. But he's only a small god.
So a very small tortoise.
Gods don't have to be big, they can be very small.
Yes. Actual size.
Yes. Again, it's maybe also the idea that engaging with dark deities is to engage with your own internal darkness.
Well, this is
to a point at least.
well, this is it's like if you engage with dark deities, all your evil will be exposed.
It's a risk.
Well, it is a risk. It is a risk. If that, there's a question that if you're not prepared to look at your own shadow,
Should you be doing this in the first place?
should you be doing any dodgy stuff in the first place? Because if you don't look at your own shadow, you could sort of become it.
Well, yes, that's
You could-
Jung's argument around an anti-adrenaline, that you become the thing you
you
repress.
could give up your goodness, steadfastness,
Yes. It's a point.
like falling into the abyss
Yes.
that you sort of lose your humanity.
Yes. There's an interesting point made by both Jung and a couple of other later Jungians, that the desperately puritanical, the ones that are trying to be so good, so clean, so pure, so
Your
exemplary,
shadows and everybody
are
else.
often the most intolerant, bigoted, hateful,
bigoted, hateful people.
Yes. And so that, again, it's the anagidromia. The harder you run away from something, the bigger it will become as a presence in your life, and until the day you actually stop running and say, "Okay, we need to talk." You know, me and you, me and the darkness. We need to talk and realise that
Turn
I
and
can't
face
run
your-
away from something that's
turn
actually
and face your
inside.
demons.
Yes. We'll realise that maybe you are the demon.
Wow.
Sometimes, at least.
Hey there, I'm glad we caught up with you. You've got this thing. Sorry, I'm digressing again.
Oh, right. Shall we have a drinky break?
Yes.
And a loo break and all of that? And I'll
Yes.